Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university, focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. HPU's call to action is choose to be extraordinary. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
A recent quote from a local business publication here in the Carolinas recently stated, and I say verbatim, quote, "At no other point in America's history have construction costs accelerated so aggressively," end quote. Welcome again to the most widely watched and longest running source of Carolina business policy and public affairs. I'm Chris William. Happy holidays. And thank you for supporting this dialogue. In a moment, we will unpack things like commercial real estate, construction costs, other major economic indicators, business, policy dialogue here in our region, like we do every week. And later on, we're joined by Roger Perry from East West Partners out of North Carolina's Triangle. In a moment, though, we'll start this week's dialogue with our expert panel. Stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Linda Brown of the Asheboro Randolph Chamber of Commerce, Bernie Mazyck of the South Carolina Association for Community Economic Development, and special guest Roger Perry, president of East West Partners.
Welcome again to our program. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you, too.
Good to have you both here. Thanks for making the trip and joining us.
Sure.
Bernie, I'm going to start with you, and I want to quote this. There was a piece from the Labor Department that was reported in the Atlantic and the New York Times that talked about wage growth, and it said it is not, basically I'm going to kind of just make a synopsis of this, but it was analysis from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta that found that wage growth among the lowest 25% of earners had actually exceeded the growth as a percentage of those on the top of the pyramid, and wages for low-income workers may be growing at their highest rate in 20 years. Now, I know that doesn't show up in a lot of stories, but let's talk about that for a second. So, of the lowest wage earners, about 44% of the low wage earners make up the workforce, and that's true in Charleston and South Carolina and North Carolina. So how does the wage growth now in this economy, fourth quarter of 2019, how do you think it looks? What do you think the challenges are?
Well, first of all, you have to look at where a lot of low-income individuals started, and they started very low. So when you look at wage growth, it's still not keeping up with costs, it's not keeping up with expenses, it's not keeping up with pricing. Right now in South Carolina, 30% of the jobs in South Carolina are low-wage jobs compared to others. And so we still have challenges of economic disparities that exist within certain sectors. And although South Carolina has done a great job in diversifying the kind of industries and companies that we attract, but the wage growth, although it is evident, is still not keeping up with the demands and the costs of our economy.
Linda, do you see that in the Sandhills of North Carolina as well? Is that?
Well, what we hear more about is the lack of human capital, people to fill jobs. A lot of the industries, they talk about skills gaps.
Yeah.
And in terms of wages, we're not hearing at the chamber levels anyway, of people dissatisfied. It sounds like with the increasing economy, people are reinvesting in their people and training them better, training them more, cross-training people. And I think part of the layoffs that happened 10 years ago resulted in, well, now the economy's bounced back, people are making more money, but maybe they're doing a little bit different job than they used to, and they've been cross-trained to do multiple things. So that's kind of where we're seeing it.
Okay, Bernie, go ahead.
Well, another challenge that we see is transportation. South Carolina is still relatively a rural state, and we, unlike North Carolina, that's been wise enough to embrace mass transit, we have not in South Carolina. In some places. But we still have challenges of individuals being able to go to where the job centers are.
Do you have success? And let me focus on this for just a second. So, and this is a question for both of you. Would you have success arguing within the General Assemblies then, back to your point, Bernie, arguing for transportation deployment and or education? And if you push on those two big issues, then the unemployment and the wage growth issues are going to fix themselves. Is that fair to say?
I would say they would have a major impact. You still have such factors as access to capital. You have factors such as just the overall disparities of where people are located. Yes, in South Carolina, when we passed the gas tax increase, that is now beginning to create more opportunities to invest in transportation, greater roads, greater road expansion. But it's still creating some challenges there. Don't get me wrong, South Carolina is doing quite well. We're excited about what's happening there, but we still recognize that there are disparities of those at the lower end of the income level.
Linda?
I'd love to see some more work done to expand mass transportation. We don't have it in Randolph County. We do have transit that comes from Greensboro, but the schedule doesn't really help anybody get to a job. It's not practical. And even with schools, you know, having to, if they have children in their district that are homeless and have shelter out of county, the school district has to pay that transportation to get the child to their home school. So school districts are really facing transportation issues on top of what workers are having as well. So I just think the whole issue of transportation would solve a lot of challenges that we have.
And I'm glad you mentioned housing. Housing costs are just enormous. The level of growth, and you're going to talk about construction costs in a moment, right. But the availability of affordable housing is also impacting the ability for those of the low-income, low-wealth areas to prosper, because they can't afford the housing that's being developed in the
Are you referring to some of the urban cores, Bernie?
Absolutely, and even in rural areas, because in rural areas, what you largely have is the need for housing rehab, more housing rehab, because there's housing stock there, but it's dilapidated, and so it needs to be rehabilitated. So,
you know, I think of the quote from the city planning director, or one of the city planning director in the department, Linda, that said, I was talking about Raleigh City Planning, he said, and I can't remember his name, but he said, you know, when the economy's bad and people can't afford rents, we have a problem. When the economy's good and the rents are out of control, it's a problem. So in reference to what Bernie said, and you're nodding your head, Bernie, do you have the same problem? Do you see the same problem? Is housing costs are, you know, now they're out of reach. And before, people weren't making enough money to even afford a standard mid-level rent.
We have a very interesting booming housing market in our particular area, and I think probably central North Carolina is a lot the same. We've got lots of housing. Some of it is, as you mentioned, older and needs some rehab, but housing prices are still very affordable. And Bernie and I were talking earlier, where the affordable housing is, sometimes there isn't the high-speed internet access that allows, you know, a lot of people work remotely now, or providing opportunities to bring jobs to some of those rural areas where it is more affordable to live, and and the challenge then is high-speed internet access. So
not to interrupt you, but just stay on that for a second, because North Carolina has been has touted the idea that they're very progressive when it comes to broadband access, even in the rural areas. Do you see that in Randolph and Alamance and et cetera, Guilford?
Parts have that,
but not broadly.
There are still some areas where it's a challenge, and our advocacy network, both our telecom and our utility people are saying they want to see more done to have a better coverage for high-speed internet access. Because
we have about 30 seconds before we bring our guest on. Bernie, I want to come back to this idea. As you articulated the challenges for those that barely make a living wage or live below the living wage, let's look around a corner. 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. Let's say the economy softens within that period. Then what happens? Because we've got a good economy now, but when the economy gets soft, how does the lower wage earner look then?
Well, they're going to be even experiencing greater challenges finding jobs, because when things tighten, then you have companies cutting back on hiring and so forth, and so it becomes a greater challenge. When during the last recession, we had humongous challenges when it came to jobs and earnings, and it affected other things. There was higher foreclosure rates. There were greater amounts of evictions, and so if the economy softens, we really are going to see a challenge. That's why we are promoting other means for low-income individuals to be able to prosper, to include starting their own business, to get into microenterprise development. There are huge opportunities out there for that. And so we're working to try to promote that part so that you might be able to have some buffers that will prevent people from falling off the income ladder.
Bernie, Linda, thank you. Stay with us. We're going to meet our guests in just a moment. Before we do that, fourth quarter is always an important quarter for retailing, and certainly it's true in food retailing. Next week on this program is the Chief Executive Officer of Greensboro-based The Fresh Market. Larry Appel joins us. And then also a two-part program we do every year at the end of the year and the beginning of the next year. It's a two-part economic review and an economic forecast. We have I will call them our resident economists, but tend to be a cast of characters because it can be a bit of a free-for-all, but it's a good program, very interesting. We hope you will tune in for both of those programs as well. The Crane Index is a euphemism for major construction activity, mostly in urban cores here in the Carolinas. No doubt it's at the highest levels it's been in contemporary history. Joining us now is someone that leans into that sector to some degree, certainly knows something about development, about construction. It is Roger Perry from East West Partners in Chapel Hill. Roger, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris. Nice to be here.
Roger, how would you describe the Crane Index right now?
Well, first of all, it is a real credit to the growth and vibrancy of our region, but yet it's there's a sharp divide. All the cranes are in, pretty much all the cranes are in Charleston and Greenville and Charlotte and some in the Triad and the Triangle. And the growth of urban areas within our region have led to this kind of growth. And the in-migration we have, people seem to be concentrating in the urban areas, not only from outside our region, but people within our region migrating to the urban areas where there's more job opportunity, where the quality of life is perceived to be higher. You know, my only concern is in our industry, is having been in the business now almost 50 years, is there too much, and how long will it go on?
So can you answer those two questions?
You know, Chris, if I could answer those two questions, I would have been able to retire a long time ago.
Sure.
Because they're very, predicting it's very hard. One thing that's encouraging about this cycle of growth seems to be that the growth has not gotten overheated. It's been consistent, but not speculative and not overheated throughout this period.
So, not to interrupt you, sir, but you don't think that's a bubble then? Well, you wouldn't describe it that way?
No, I don't think this is a bubble. I think there's certain sub-regions and subsectors within the marketplace that are overbuilt or overactive, but I think the overall picture is good. You know, the real problem are external issues outside the control of the local regions or the local development community. We recently had an example of where we're finishing up a large multifamily residential project in Wilmington, and our contractor came to us and said, we've had a 200% increase in the cost of countertops. And I said, well, now that's interesting. He said, yeah. He said, we get all our countertops from China, and with the fear of the tariffs,
sure.
everybody's raised the price 200%. I said, well, fine, we'll buy them in America. He said, well, they saw the price increase in China, and so they matched it. So those kind of external factors always are the biggest bugaboo when you have growth.
Okay. Bernie, question?
Employment, we spoke of that earlier. Are you challenged in finding your employees and the workforce? Is that an issue for you? And are you having to go?
It's a very large issue. It's a twofold issue, Bernie. One is there is concentrated and intense growth in certain areas, which tax the labor pool and tax the labor pool. But since the recession, the last recession, there was an enormous shrinkage in the subcontractor trades within our industry, and they have not come back. And now, coupled with very difficult immigration policy, it has resulted in a scarcity of trades and quality subcontractors, and everybody in my business is having a very difficult time with that. That obviously also drives prices up, and price escalation of construction within the active markets is a big issue. The last 3 projects we've had, as we got closer and closer to breaking ground, we found ourselves having to value engineer as much as 10 or 12% out of the cost in order to continue to make the project viable.
What has it been traditionally, the cost for engineering, as you just stated it? 5%?
No, I was talking about value engineering, where you take your project and say, okay, how can we change this project without suffering quality dilution and get the price back in line? No, the cost of regular mechanical engineering and structural engineering, that has not been a problem.
Okay. Linda?
I guess my question is, I hear from a lot of municipalities, they have trouble finding contractors willing to bid on the RFPs they put out for construction projects. And I'm wondering, did the passage of the Connect-NC bond and the, $2 billion that was earmarked for construction, capital construction, roads, schools, universities, has that impacted your industry and the ability to find people, or is that part of the reason why we're having trouble finding people to build public projects?
I think that it's the same 2 reasons I mentioned about in the private sector. I think there's a lot going on, especially in the Carolinas. And number 2 is there's just a shortage of the force. But no, I don't think that, frankly, Linda, $2 billion spread over the state doesn't have much impact.
I'm going to go slightly in a different direction, because it's in Charleston where we've seen tremendous growth and multifamily, condos, hotels. When you're considering an area to develop a project, what's been the process of citing that and its compatibility to that area where you're thinking of locating, through local government, through communities? What's been that process?
Well, first of all, our company, we made a decision in our company some years ago to concentrate our business within the boundaries of just North Carolina. I like to sleep in my own bed. That's one of the reasons we did that. But you know, there are markets, Bernie, that clearly have vibrancy and clearly have opportunity to them. We have we think, a particular area of expertise within the industry that gives us a competitive edge. So we look for and are receptive when people bring to us sites in those active, vibrant markets with the intended and highest and best use being being the kind of development that fits our profile of what we've spent almost 50 years doing. And so, and in all candor, a lot of it's serendipitous.
Oh,
somebody will give us a phone call and say,
Okay.
I got a site in such and such a spot. You want to look at it? And we'll say,
Yeah, sure, and that drives it. As you talk about this, Roger, I think of that the size of the projects and the high water mark now of the projects are huge. Your riverfront project in Wilmington, Charlotte Mecklenburg is doing a $50 million study design for transportation, just the study and design. There's a $1 billion proposal in Raleigh that DeWitt Design is trying to do. You think of Hughes Development up in Greenville that have more than $1 billion going on. I mean, these projects have gotten very large. Is it because of just in-migration? Is it the low cost of capital? How have they gotten so big? Is the region just that big now, and that's the way it is?
You just proposed 3 points to that, and I think they're all relative and valid as part of the reason for it. I mean, we've grown up. The Carolinas have, we've grown up. We've become an active urban area. The one troubling point that you brought up that always troubles me, and I've seen over and over again in the business, there is an enormous amount of capital chasing projects. People trying to find a place. I've never heard the word yield, and you in your industry hear it a lot, but every time I talk to somebody about investment, whether they've come to us or whether we're going to them, their whole mantra is yield, 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 yield. What kind of yield can I get?
But they call it cap rates in your business, right? Same thing.
Well, when you exit, it's cap rates.
Okay.
But like for construction financing and equity, yes, and it's interesting. There are two different types of equity that we see. We see the very passive, long-term equity that likes to put something in a quality project and then retain it and own it and utilize the cash stream from it for a long, long period of time. And quite frankly, if you look at the families and small investment facilities that have done so well, whether it's pension funds or what have you, people who take that longer strategy over time really, really do very, very well.
So you are seeing capital sources that are outside of this region that are interested in investing in this region.
Oh my goodness. Almost all the capital we use comes from, for large projects, comes from institutional investment firms and companies outside of the Triangle who pool assets of both high net worth individuals, other corporations, institutional funding, teachers' funds, pension funds from all around. And there's just an enormous, with the kind of yield that you can get on fixed rate investments, and with the equities market being so high and the multiples getting pretty high there. So people are looking for diversification. I heard y'all talking about that earlier. They're looking for a way to diversify, and there's been more and more interest in southeastern real estate, and we in the Carolinas have been real beneficiaries.
We have less than a minute left, Linda, so I want to ask him a quick follow-up. Roger, it's not fair because it doesn't give you enough time, but you're a former member of the UNC Board of Governors. You're a former member...
UNC Chapel Hill Board of Trustees.
I'm sorry, Board of Trustees. Right. Thank you, stand corrected. You're also recently a member of the UNC Healthcare Board.
Right.
When does, and this is my term, but when does the political squabbling around all things political with the system of the university, when does that settle down? And can you do it in 45 seconds?
I wish I could snap my fingers and make it happen in 45 seconds. I think that it's beginning to happen. I think that the unintended consequences of the highly volatile nature of the way the Board of Governors has been doing their responsibility, the legislature and the if you will, moving down out of a 30,000-foot level into a lower level on higher education and healthcare. I think that they're beginning to see the unintended consequences are not what they want.
I'm sorry, that was not fair to give you that little time, but thank you. Please come back. Happy holidays.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
So nice to be with y'all.
Same
Linda,
here.
good to see you. Bernie, good to see you.
Thank you.
Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by High Point University, Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.